He was once the man who ruled Rome, at least the Rome that lived on screen. And by doing so, he ruled the world far beyond it. Russell Crowe, the gladiator who turned wounds into strength, who transformed silence into thunder and fury into something almost musical, became more than an actor. He became an era. His voice, deep, deliberate, and weighted with the gravity of centuries, carried the echoes of soldiers, kings, thieves, and broken men. His eyes, fierce one moment, vulnerable the next, reflected the lives of every character he ever inhabited. In Gladiator, he did not simply play a warrior. He became the warrior we all secretly wish we could be. Noble even in defeat, defiant in despair, undefeated in spirit even when stripped of everything. Hollywood raised him to the height of a god, and the world crowned him as a legend carved out of fire and grit. And then, at the peak of fame, at the moment when most men cling desperately to the spotlight, Russell simply stepped away. Today, far from red carpets and rehearsed interviews, he wakes to the soft cry of magpies instead of applause. The air around him smells not of champagne and perfume, but of rain-soaked soil, eucalyptus leaves, and the breath of open land. He lives quietly on a farm on the mid-north coast of Australia, a place where the only audience is the wind curling through the trees and the occasional rustle of animals moving through the grass. Where once he commanded the world with lines that became immortal, "My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius," he now commands something far rarer: peace. At 61, that peace is not a retreat but a victory, the kind no award can ever match. When asked gently during an interview whether he would ever marry again, he laughed, a soft, almost private laugh. His eyes, warm but distant, carried a truth he no longer needed to hide. "Why would I ruin happiness with a wedding?" he joked. Yet beneath the humor lay a quiet sincerity. The kind of man speaks only after having lost deeply, loved fiercely, and rebuilt himself piece by piece. Behind that calm, unbothered smile lies a story not defined by rising fame, but by surviving it. Not by glory, but by grief. Not by love that vanished, but by wisdom that remained. This is not the story of a celebrity. It is the story of a man who once commanded empires, on camera, in culture, in memory, only to discover that the greatest empire of all is one's own solitude, and the greatest victory is learning how to stand in it without fear. Long before the golden Oscar statue sat in his hands, long before the headlines glorified him or the rumors tried to define him, there was just a boy in Wellington, New Zealand. A quiet boy who spent his childhood in the shadowed corners of film sets, watching lights shimmer across strangers' faces. His parents worked behind the cameras, not as stars but as providers, running catering trucks for film crews that drifted from one project to the next. To most children, a movie set would have felt like magic, a circus of lights and illusions. But for Russell, it was simply life, and life, even in its magical places, is complicated. He learned early that magic disappears the moment the cameras stop rolling. One day the air is filled with laughter. The next day, silence. One day everyone knows your name. The next, they move on and forget you. His first life lesson came quietly but firmly. Everything is temporary. Applause has an echo, and even the brightest lights eventually fade. At the age of 4, his family moved to Sydney. They left behind the crisp New Zealand wind and stepped into Australia's thick, demanding heat. A land of longer hours, tighter paychecks, and new uncertainties. His parents worked endlessly. His father's hands were always repairing something broken. His mother always stretching every dollar to its thinnest possibility. Love in their home was expressed through work, through effort, through endurance. Russell watched it all in silence, absorbing more than any child his age should have to. He became observant, thoughtful, older than his years, without anyone realizing how quickly he was growing inward. At school, he wasn't the charming boy everyone wanted to talk to. He wasn't the loud one who performed for attention. He was the watcher, the boy who saw the small lies people told to fit in, the way laughter sometimes hid insecurity, the way some children pretended to be strong to survive their own fears. These tiny human truths fascinated him. He didn't just look at faces. He studied them. He didn't just hear voices. He felt the emotions buried beneath them. That rare gift, some might call a curse, would one day shape him into an actor who didn't imitate people, but understood them, carried them, and ultimately became them. His evenings were filled with quiet imitation. not to entertain, but to understand. He wanted to know why some men commanded a room while others disappeared in the background, why some voices demanded attention and others trembled with unspoken wounds. Acting, even before he knew it was acting, became his language of understanding the world. By 14, he began taking small roles, television, theater, anything at all. It thrilled him at first, the chance to slip into another life, another skin. But over time he realized that acting was not an escape from himself. It was a mirror reflecting him back at himself. And so the boy who grew up on the edges of other people's stories began preparing, quietly, unknowingly, to write his own. He had once stood as Rome's ruler, at least a Rome imagined by millions, and in claiming that crown on the screen, he captured far more than a kingdom. He captured an era. Russell Crowe, the man whose performances felt carved from ancient stone and living fire, became the face of a hero who did not merely survive pain, but turned it into a weapon. His voice, resonant and measured, carried the ghosts of men long gone, soldiers who fought for honor, fathers who carried regret in their bones, leaders shaped by sacrifice. His eyes, sharp yet unexpectedly tender, held the contradictions of humanity, strength and ache, rage and mercy, command and fragility. When he stepped into the armor of gladiator, he did not act. He transformed. He embodied the courage we wish we possessed, the loyalty we hoped we could hold, and the defiance we prayed would rise in us if life stripped us bare. Hollywood worshipped him. The world followed. And at the very height of it all, Russell Crowe did something almost unthinkable. He let go. While countless actors clinged to the spotlight with trembling hands, terrified of fading relevance, Russell stepped quietly backward, almost gratefully, as if he'd been waiting for the lights to dim. The transition was not dramatic. There was no announcement, no carefully crafted exit speech. He simply drifted away from the noise, like a tide retreating from shore. Today, instead of the thunder of crowds, he wakes to the soft, curious calls of magpies outside his window. The fragrance surrounding him is no longer the artificial sweetness of premier night cologne, but the earthy scent of wet soil, fresh grass, and the breath of the Australian coastline. He lives on a calm stretch of land on the mid-north coast, part sanctuary, part memory, part rebirth. There, his only witnesses are the trees bending with the wind, and the animals moving through the quiet like forgotten characters wandering offstage. The man who once delivered lines powerful enough to etch themselves into cinema history, "My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius," has now traded immortality for tranquility. At 61, he no longer seeks applause. He seeks stillness. And stillness for him has become a form of triumph. In one rare interview, when asked whether he ever imagined marrying again, he responded with a gentle laugh. It wasn't cynical. It was soft, knowing, edged with a truth he no longer needed to hide from a world. "Why would I spoil happiness with a wedding?" he teased. But beneath the joke was a lifetime of pain and learning. Only a man who has lost deeply, loved honestly, and rebuilt himself with patience can speak so calmly about what others spend their lives chasing. Behind that serene smile lies a story shaped by endurance more than ambition, by grief more than glory, by wisdom rather than romance. This is not the tale of a celebrity rising and falling. It is the story of man discovering the quiet strength of standing alone and understanding that sometimes the greatest empire you will ever rule is the one within your own heart. Long before cameras adored him, long before magazine covers claimed him, before the world tried to mold him into something larger than life, he was just a boy in Wellington, New Zealand. A boy who wandered among film sets not as a star, but as a shadow. His parents worked behind the scenes, running catering trucks for crews who vanished after every project. For Russell, those film sets were not glamorous. They were simply home. A home built on temporary friendships, temporary spaces, temporary magic. He discovered early that everything beautiful eventually packs up and leaves. The lights, the laughter, the people. His childhood taught him one lesson that fame would later confirm. Nothing lasts forever. When he was 4, his family moved to Australia. With them came hope, exhaustion, and an unspoken agreement that life would not get easier, but they would continue anyway. His father fixed whatever was broken. His mother stretched every dollar into two. Love in their house was not spoken in dramatic declarations. It lived in long workdays and scraped hands, in quiet perseverance. Russell absorbed these lessons with the intensity of someone who watched the world instead of participating in it. In school, he was not the class clown or the charismatic favorite. He was the observer, the one who noticed the cracks in people's laughter, the fear hidden behind bragging, the way children copied each other just to belong. He didn't merely see expressions. He understood them. He sensed the stories others didn't know how to tell. Years later, this would become his greatest strength as an actor, the ability to carry another person's truth inside himself. He often mimicked people at home, not for attention, but to decode them. Why did some men speak with thunder, while others spoke with trembling? Why did some people shrink in silence, while others hid their sorrow behind loudness? Acting was not yet a profession for him. It was his way of deciphering humanity. At 14, when he stepped into his first small roles, he felt the thrill of stepping out his own skin. But eventually, he realized that acting did not free him from himself. It reflected him more clearly. And so, long before he ever stepped into an arena as Maximus, the boy who once fetched food for film crews was unknowingly sharpening the very tools that would one day build his legend. Fame never truly leaves a man, even when he tries to walk away from it with both hands open. It lingers like a shadow, like a ghost that refuses to fade simply because the door has closed. As Russell Crowe worked the soil on his farm and let his public life grow quiet, Hollywood continued to orbit around him. Scripts kept arriving. Studios still called. Journalists still asked for a moment of his time. He accepted a few, declined most, but every time he did return to a film set, he brought with him a different energy, an unshakable stillness that whispered, "I no longer belong to this world, and I no longer need it." What others spent their lives chasing had become, for him, something he had outgrown. Fame, once a destination, had transformed into a detour, an illusion he had walked through to discover something far more valuable, the truth of who he really was. He began to understand that the applause that once thrilled him now felt hollow. Noise had lost its meaning. Silence had become his refuge. And so, while the world continued chasing a legend, Russell quietly turned toward the one place where the world could not follow: home. But every hero, no matter how grand his victories, must one day confront the quiet that comes after the final applause. For Russell, that quiet arrived not because fame faded, but because love did. Danielle Spencer had known him before the world did, before the Oscar, before the chaos, before the myth of Russell Crowe existed. She met him when he was still the fiery young man from New Zealand, driven by dreams large enough to frighten him. At that time, they laughed easily, moved in harmony, creating without fear of judgment. They were equals, two artists stitched together by curiosity, stubbornness, and music. Their love felt unshakable, built on late-night conversations, shared ambitions, and a tenderness that fame could not touch. Together they built a home, one filled with guitars leaning against couches, children's drawings taped to walls, and the laughter of their two sons, Charles and Tennyson, echoing through the rooms. On the outside, their life looked perfect. The international star and the Australian singer, raising a family untouched by scandal. But perfection asks for sacrifices. Fame devours time. Success demands distance. Russell traveled constantly, across oceans, across continents, while Danielle stayed home, holding together a world that seemed determined to split. Their love became a thread pulled tight across countries and time zones, and eventually it began to fray. By 2012, they both understood the truth. There were no villains in their story, no betrayal, just two people undone by a life too big for tenderness to survive. They separated gently, with grace instead of rage. But for Russell, the emptiness afterward was heavier than any character he had ever played. He once admitted that love leaves an imprint deeper than fame, because when it disappears, you don't simply lose a partner. You lose the version of yourself that existed only with them. The world had labeled him Hollywood's angry man. They talked about bar fights, short tempers, arrogance. What they never saw was a loneliness. They never saw the man awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, replaying echoes of home that no longer existed. The anger they mocked was never cruelty. It was grief wearing armor. Years passed. Headlines dimmed. He worked less, aged quietly, traveled when he felt like it. And then, unexpectedly, someone gentle entered his life. Brittany Theriot, once an actress, now a real estate agent, brought with her a softness he hadn't felt in years. She was younger by decades, but her spirit felt old, steady. With her, laughter returned, not the loud, wild kind, but the quiet kind that patches cracks inside the heart. The tabloids did what tabloids do. Russell Crowe engaged. Gladiator wedding soon. Russell only smiled and said, "All these reports say we're engaged. No, we're very, very good friends. My life is joyous. Why would I ruin that with a wedding?" The word spread across the internet, half joke, half confession. But beneath them was something sacred. After losing loved ones, he learned how fragile happiness is. It is not something to cage. It is something to protect. He no longer needed vows or ceremonies to prove affection. He had lived through the failure of promises made with the best intentions. Life on the farm softened him in ways fame never could. His sons grew older. The property expanded. His smile returned, subtle, steady, touched by wisdom. Sometimes he sat on his porch with guitar, playing melodies that drifted to the trees like unfinished prayers. Half love, half farewell. He joked about his aging health. "I'm not dying. My problems are just mental." But beneath the humor was a truth many men hide. Time wears down not only the body but the spirit. Through loss, through fame, through heartbreak, one truth emerged. The deepest wounds do not end you. They remake you. They strip you of everything unnecessary until only your essential self remains. He no longer chased perfection because he finally understood that love does not need permanence to be real. His marriage had ended, but tenderness remained. His empire had crumbled, but in its ruins he found something far greater, his humanity. There is a calmness in him now, the kind that only belongs to men who have lived fully, lost deeply, and finally stopped running. It is not surrender. It is arrival. And on his land in New South Wales, where mornings smell of eucalyptus and the earth hums beneath his boots, he has discovered the simplest truth of all. Peace is the last, greatest victory. On stage under a single light, he no longer hides behind characters. He sings as himself. The voice that once roared across battlefields now trembles with honesty. He knows the world doesn't always understand his choices. Some still mock his albums, his simplicity, his refusal to chase the next big thing. But that doesn't matter anymore. He has learned that peace has nothing to prove. He understands now that fame is a mirage, bright, seductive, but hollow. It's not the movies that mess you up, he once said. It's the fame. Those words were never about bitterness. They were about freedom, to see through the illusion, to walk away from the noise, to know that the applause of the crowd can never replace the voice inside you. And so, he gives quietly now. He teaches young filmmakers, supports struggling artists, helps where he can without cameras present. He says the only duty of an actor is to give, not to take, not to impress, not to pretend, but to give, and that philosophy has become his way of living. He gives to the land of people he loves, to his craft, to his sons. There's wisdom in how he speaks about aging, too. It's a surprise he laughs to still be employable at 61. But there's humility in that humor. He knows that every season of life has its own purpose. He no longer sees age as loss, but as clarity in the last breath. His recent documentary. There's a moment near the end. He lifts a glass, smiles faintly, and says, "Cheers," the title alone carries weight like an unspoken confession. The world wondered if it meant goodbye if the gladiator was laying down his sword, but Russell only laughed. He said, "I'm not dying. My health problems are all mental." It was a joke, yes, but also a glimpse into truth, for what he meant was simple, that the battles are no longer physical. They're internal. The war now is between acceptance and resistance, between who he was and who he's become, and for the first time, he is winning that war. He has made peace with his reflection, with the lines on his face, with the noise of the past. With the ghosts of his mistakes. He knows he cannot hold on to you, fame, or even love, but he can hold on to honesty. That is the hidden truth, that the gladiator's greatest victory was not in the arena, not on screen, not under the blinding lights of the Oscars. It was here in the quiet of an Australian field where no one is watching, and yet everything that matters finally sees him, because peace is not the absence of battle. Peace is the understanding that the battle was never against the world. was always against oneself. The sun set slowly over the rolling fields of New South Wales, brushing the sky in shades of amber, and Violet Russell Crowe stand at the edge of his land, one hand resting on the wooden fence. He built himself. The air is cool, the light softens everything. It catches the grass, the horses' lines on his weathered face for the first time in his life. He doesn't need to perform for anyone. He is not Maximus, not John Nash, not Jack Aubrey. He is simply Russell, a man who has made peace with the noise that once defined him. In the final scene of The Last Breath, his upcoming documentary, he raises a glass. The camera lingers on his eyes, the same eyes that once burned to the screen with fury and faith. And he says a single word: cheers. It isn't loud, it isn't rehearsed. It's a whisper to time itself. To some it feels like a farewell, a curtain closing on a life lived in the spotlight. But to him, it is a greeting, a toast to everything that made him the child who watched. Film sets from the shadows, a young man who sang in empty bars, the actor who carried entire worlds. Inside him, the father who learned to love without possession, a man who learned to stay. He isn't dying, he's arriving at the only destination that ever mattered. The fields stretch endlessly before him. The world that once demanded so much from him now gives him nothing but silence, and it is enough. The laughter his son's the gentle presence of someone who loves him without needing to define it. The scent of rain drifting through the valley, these are the awards that never tarnish. He knows that the films will fade, that even the greatest performances will one day become echoes. The Oscar will gather dust, the magazine covers will yellow. But the truth of who he is, the sincerity in his work, the courage in his vulnerability, the quiet strength in his solitude will outlive all of it. Because legends are not remembered for how loudly they roar, but for how gracefully they fell silent. There was a time when he feared stillness, mistaking it for emptiness. Now he understands that silence is not the absence of life. It is the proof of it. The farm hums softly under the weight of dust. The wind moves through the trees like a memory that refuses to die. Somewhere in the distance, a horse snorts a sound, echoing like applause, fading into eternity. He smiles. It's the kind of smile that doesn't ask to be seen, the kind that belongs only to men who have nothing left to prove. He has been the warrior and the poet, the lover, and the loner, the conqueror, and the wanderer. Every role was a fragment of truth, every film a confession disguised as fiction. And now, at the end of all those stories, he knows the answer to the question that haunted him for years. What is left when the crowd stops cheering? The answer is this: peace, the peace of man who finally understands that glory is temporary, but grace is eternal, that love does not need a ceremony to be sacred, that greatness is not measured in the noise of applause, but in the quiet dignity of being fully oneself. Russell Crowe's story is not tragic, it is human. It is the story of a man who fought the world, conquered it, lost it, and then in the most extraordinary twist learned that the victory was never out there, it was always within. He lifts his glass one more time to the fading light. The sky, now deep orange, mirrors the warmth of his eyes. He says cheers again to no one and everyone. If his journey has touched you, let it remind you of this even. Legends grow weary, even heroes crave quiet. And even gladiators, when the battle is done, must learn how to come home.